This is Duke University.
There was a lot of response to the appeal that went out, and we're excited to have a mix of students from Fuqua and Nicholas and a couple of other schools, so thank you for your interest. We created a wait list, and we hope that the demand for the seminars in the future will be this high again. So look for future notifications about the seminars. On the back of your agenda for today are the ones that we're planning for the rest of the year. So take a look at those now and know to look for emails and to respond to them to be able to sign up for these sessions. So once again, thank you for being here. We are kicking off our seminar series with a focus on energy efficiency. And energy efficiency runs the risk of not being the most glamorous topic. It isn't as cool as green innovation. It seems like the kind of thing that your parents want you to do. And so we're going to try to think about what it is that is available to us, and of course the case for why this is a very important place for us to be starting now in terms of being able to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It's essentially been argued that it is the lowest of hanging fruit, that this is the place to start, and we hope that we'll also give you the tools by the end of today to think about how you can make the case to others and make it exciting to others to think about taking advantage of energy efficiency. So we are grateful to our sponsor, Ingersoll Rand, for sponsoring today's series and today's seminar and the future ones in the series. We're also very glad to have members of Ingersoll Rand here today to help lead us through the process of thinking about the energy efficiency challenge and how we persuade others to adopt energy efficiency. And I'm just going to do a little bit of an overview of thinking about where this topic fits in a larger set of questions. As I introduce it, we'll then turn things over to people who will go deeper. So Brian Castelli, who is Executive Vice President of Programs and Development at Alliance to Save Energy, will be our speaker and kind of give us a big picture view of energy efficiency opportunities. And then we'll have a case discussion in the second part of our seminar today, where Pat Garibay of Ingersoll Rand will actually have you all do a hands-on project of thinking about, if you're on the company side, of thinking about a retrofit and an improvement to your energy systems, what would be the issues that you would raise? And if you're actually on the side advocating for having it adopted, if you're selling the product, what's the case that you would make? And Pat will lead us through a discussion, have you guys, first of all, think about the case and what arguments you would try to make, and lead us through a discussion then of the points of how you would actually do that effectively. And so as I kind of think about the bigger picture in which today's topic fits, it's one of the basic idea that there is a big opportunity out there for energy efficiency, that this is a great immediate opportunity for quickly addressing greenhouse gas issues. And McKinsey has essentially argued there are lots of energy efficiency projects out there that are positive net present value, that these are the proverbial low-hanging fruit that we should be grabbing. Now, why is it that people don't grab them? That's kind of the basic question. And we can think about there being two main audiences then for energy efficiency. One on the business side, which will be the focus of what Pat will have us focusing on, and also on the consumer side. And we can think about, on the business side, facilities, manufacturing, transportation, and likewise on the consumer side, issues of consumer, residential, the products we buy. So what are the obstacles then to finding greater energy efficiency? Well, I like to think of there being two big categories, one on the motivation side. So just some consumer examples are, we don't value savings that come a year or two from now. We discount the future too much, far greater than economists would say that we should be discounting the future. There's a pain of out-of-pocket expenses. Psychologists call this loss aversion, that when we actually have to pay out of pocket, it's too painful. I think that there's also, for those who are even interested in trying to be more efficient and help the environment, a kind of sucker effect that we have to worry about, which is, why should I be trying to do things and sacrificing if everyone around me doesn't seem to be? So can we do things to overcome that social comparison? And then of course, there's always market segments out there. So for all the people who are interested inherently in trying to do better things for the environment, there's probably another group that's cynical about global warming and perhaps even resistant to messages that target that. So that's a kind of consumer set of motivations, and our main topic today will be more on the business side. So what are the business motivations for wanting to adopt energy efficiency, and what are the obstacles then to adoption? So there's limited capital budgets, that whatever capital we have, there's a set of investments that we're allocating it across, and I think there's a bit of psychology that comes back in here, which is reducing costs isn't as sexy as getting to invest in future products that kind of compete for our attention. So there's a psychology of what wins in the argument over budgets. There's typically going to be a necessary return on investment or a payback period, and Pat will talk more about that as an obstacle. There may be limited decision-making authority depending on who you're talking to in an organization and knowing who it is you need to be talking to. There's always dangers of who actually controls the budgets to make the investment decisions. May not be the people who kind of get credit for the savings, so there's a misalignment of incentives, which is a classic problem economists focus on. And then finally, there may be an absence of goals, metrics, and this kind of works at a few different levels in organizations. If there's no interest at the top in trying to improve energy efficiency, that message then doesn't exist, and no one below it kind of has a chance to build off of a commitment that's made from above. So the most successful organizations will have a CEO who has made a public commitment, and having done that, it becomes very easy to leverage that below. So the obstacle is, what if upper management hasn't? And even when upper management says that they want to move in this direction, there's always the issue of how measurable and tangible is people below, is their performance on that dimension? Are they held accountable for it? Are they rewarded for it? Is there a kind of a connection between the goals set up above and the actual things that are expected below and incentivized below? So lots of obstacles to adoption on the motivation side. A shorter list here, but one also of interest to me, which is, do people have good information about where energy efficiency is? Do they have a good understanding of what will create efficiency? So on the consumer side, there's a lack of information and feedback on where energy savings are. There also are confusing metrics. This is of personal interest to me that I think there are a few. Consumers don't even have that many metrics that they actually have access to on energy use, and some of them really are misleading as currently specified. And on the business side, I think there's a parallel lack of information and feedback on energy savings, and we can think about kind of improving information and feedback there. So I'm going to give you 3 quick consumer examples, and then let our experts kind of round out the conversation with a more of a focus on the business side. So one motivational one on how the price of carbon is framed, and then a couple on the information side in terms of how people think about energy use and metrics. So some psychologists at Columbia University did a study in the last year where they had people think about buying airplane tickets and offsetting the carbon emissions from a flight. And they essentially framed the relatively small cost of an offset for the flight either as a carbon offset or as a tax. And there are kind of typical market segment reactions to those two frames. The Democrats are essentially happy to help the environment no matter what the frame, but if you use that word tax with Republicans or independents, they run the other direction. They find it much more acceptable to think about an offset than to think about a tax. And we have to kind of think about, if it's possible, to think about the different messages we'd use with different market segments from a consumer perspective. And then just a couple of information examples. A paper that just came out in September in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences summarized the results from a survey of 500 adult Americans, where they asked them to estimate the energy that's used by different products in your house, different appliances and different activities. And they have on this graph the actual energy plotted on the x-axis and then the perception on the y-axis. And you know, an interesting thing, there's an identity line here, which is if you were perfectly accurate, your guesses would follow on the identity line. Well, and so the types of things are compact fluorescent bulbs, laptops, desktop computer, stereo, on up to then the big things in the house, like air conditioners and electric dryers and dishwashers, which are the big energy hogs. Well, people's perceptions are roughly accurate in that they get the order right. They know which ones use more rather than less, but they don't have any sense of the magnitude. And they really, I think, don't understand kind of how much greater those big appliances are in terms of their energy use than smaller appliances like light bulbs. And I mean, to many people's credit, they've done the right thing and switched from incandescent to compact fluorescent. It is useful, but if we think about the magnitude of where the savings are, if that kind of stops them from thinking about my 10-year-old dishwasher and my 15-year-old dryer and those kinds of issues, there's essentially big areas for potential savings that could even pay back in a reasonable period of time that people might be missing. So this is a snapshot of the psychology of, we really underestimate the energy that's used by our bigger appliances. We also, I think, as a kind of corollary to that, underestimate where the big savings might be if we actually wanted to make an improvement around our house. One other last example of information and metrics, and this comes from research of my own. If we think about miles per gallon as our standard measure of efficiency in the US, which is our standard measure, and we think about how it actually translates into gas consumption, it's a reciprocal, and it leads to a very familiar curve, which is steeply curved. And if we think about then the gas consumption of vehicles that are in the teens in MPG and the gas that they use versus those at 30 and 40 and 50 miles per gallon, it gets very flat up in those high MPGs, and it's very steep in the teens. Now, the problem with MPG is we've grown up with it, we think we know what it means, and we know how to use it, and if we use it as our proxy for thinking about where is energy savings in our life when we think about buying a vehicle, it can be misleading. And I think the main problem is that we use MPG as a proxy for gas savings, and we're very tempted to subtract it. So we might subtract, thinking about trading in a car, a 33 MPG car traded in for a 50 MPG car. That leap looks very impressive in our mind, and people think that that's worth a lot of gas savings. They're not so impressed by thinking about trading in a 12 MPG car for a 15 MPG car. That leap doesn't look very impressive. So if we subtract MPG, we can reach the wrong conclusion about gas consumption. So when people compare cars, they tend to subtract it. And so, for example, people will rate the improvement from 20 to 40 MPGs as being more valuable than an improvement from 10 to 20. The curve should make it apparent that you get a lot of gas savings from 10 to 20, and a simpler way to see this is in a table. If we think about a 10 to 20 improvement, over 100 miles of driving, we're cutting gas use from 10 gallons per 100 miles to 5. That's 5 gallons every 100 miles. If we think about the jump, I don't have 40 on here, but from 20 to 40, that's going from 5 gallons every 100 miles to 2.5 gallons every 100 miles. That's going to save 2.5 gallons. Well, so what's the tricky thing here is that the biggest gas savings are improvements on the most inefficient vehicles. I think people don't bother worrying about MPGs once it's below 20. And if we think about where we want to invest a lot of our effort to get people to make improvements, it's getting them out of the teens and into the 20s. And as much as people scoff at it, getting people from the low teens to the high teens is worth a lot. If people are going to insist on buying vehicles that are inefficient, if we could at least encourage them to kind of move where there are big gains in the teens, that is an improvement, a step in the right direction. And so because MPG is so misleading, many of you may have seen the new EPA labels that have been proposed for 2012. This is a little controversial. One version, of course, has a letter grade on it if you've run across that. That sparked a lot of controversy when it was proposed. This is the non-letter grade version. Even it is arguably somewhat controversial because there's so much information on it. My personal take is people will learn to zero in on the thing that they care about. If you care about cost, that's pretty salient. If you care about carbon, that's can be found. So my guess is that this isn't too much information. But one of the things to overcome this problem with MPG that they will be adding is gallons per 100 miles to allow people to take differences, which is what you can do with gallons per 100 miles to actually understand where the gas savings are. So that's kind of an overview then of what are the issues around motivation and information being our two big drivers of why there are obstacles to finding energy efficiency. I've given you a flavor for some consumer issues in it, and the rest of our session we're going to focus on the business side of how do you kind of get energy efficiency adopted. Brian will give us the big picture, Pat will have us go deeper into the business side and the motivations and informational problems on the business side.
Produced by Duke University, online at duke.edu.